Hey everyone, this is Julie Murphy, and today we're going to be working on how to combine designs on the screen so that you can stipple around them. So let's get started. First, we're going to go into the embroidery area. And from here, we're going to actually use some of our built-in design. So let's go into number 1, because we'll all have that, whether we've done the upgrade or not. Let's go down to design number, let's see here. We'll go to design, for this video I'm going to use design number 74, and it's 2.95 by 1.7. We're going to go ahead and set that. And before I go any further, because I'm going to try and do this on like an embroidered bag, I'm going to first go into edit, and I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees. I think I'm just going to move it up a little bit, and then I'm going to say okay. And next I'm going to do is this button right here. It has a black square and a gray square. It actually allows us to duplicate it. So I'll say duplicate and pull that one down. One thing I'd like to do is flip it. So right here, this button that has the triangle, it has the mirror image of the triangle, allows us to flip it. So now he's been flipped. So now I just need to rotate. And I'll do 90. And another 90, and I'll drag him down here. Now, one thing I would like to show you as we're working with this is if you go up to the notepad, a lot of times when I'm sewing on page 7, if I'm just doing a normal embroidery, I have no lines on my screen. And so let me show you how it looks with no lines, which that's pretty typical. But for this, because we're trying to actually get the designs where we would like to have them placed on our bag, I like to go into our notepad and go onto page 7 and then change it so that we have 1-inch blocks. And what that does is it just allows us to work with the center of the design. The other thing while I'm on page 7 is I know I'm going to be working with a 9.5 by 9.5 inch hoop. So I'm actually going to select that one, and let's go back to the screen. So I don't know if you can see this faint line here. Can you see that? There's a slightly gray line here and here. And what that does is it just allows us to see the 9.5 by 9.5 inch hoop on our screen. Now here are our two little geckos, and I have it, here's our center. And what I've done is I've moved this, I have this one moved up so his foot is touching this line, and equidistance I've moved this one down so it's touching this line. So I want to add one more design, so I'm going to say okay, and then I'm going to choose add. I'm going to still go into number 1, and I'm going to choose this little design right here that has the ladybug, and I will set it. And I can either leave the leaf like it is, but I think I'm going to rotate it. And there's our little ladybug in between our two lizards. So we'll say okay. Let me zoom back out. Now a couple of things that I want to show you here. Suppose I have each of these are 3 different designs and I'm placing them randomly on my bag. And I've decided I would like to change this color up here. This button right here, it looks like a little spool of thread with a little color palette beside it. If I select that, watch what happens. Right now the leaf is chosen. But what this little pad does is it's got a blue box. Let me zoom in so you can see that. Do you see the blue box right here around this black color? What it's doing is because the red selection box is around our leaf, right now we're setting the color for what the leaf will be. So I think for this one, let me zoom out for you. What I'm going to do is I'm going to leave the black selected, and I'm going to change it to a green color. So now one thing you have to see about this little ladybug is if I change the leaf to green, actually I'm going to do a dark green. What it does is, let me show you what it's doing. So you can see that this is now changed to a dark green color. But the other thing you have to be aware of, because this is a built-in design, is the dots on the ladybug are now going to be a dark green color. So if you don't like that, you can leave the leaf in a black. But let's go ahead and change the colors of our lizard. So if I want to do that, I can select the top one, which shows now the selection box is around the first lizard. And I'm going to make it a blue color. And now I'll choose the second lizard. And for him, I'm going to make him a darker blue. And I'm going to leave the ladybug in red, but I think I'm going to go back and change this leaf to a black. So let's say OK. Now, this is what I wanted to talk about. There's two things that I wanted to discuss with this particular design. This button down here, do you see this? That has the little square, triangle, and circle. What it does, let's go ahead and select it. Now that we're on this screen here, we have this button which allows us to group all three designs. If we didn't do that and we went on to do our stippling, we would end up stippling over top of whatever designs are not selected. So let me zoom in a little bit for you. So you see right now the red box is only around the leaf. Watch what happens when I push the button. Let me zoom out for you. Watch what happens when I select this box. Now what the pink boxes around all three designs are doing is it's letting us know that we have now combined our designs. If after doing this you look at it and you're like, oh, I don't want to do that, that's okay. You can now select this box and it ungroups them. So for this particular design, since I know I'm putting it on a bag, I'm going to go back and regroup them. And I'm going to say OK. And now what you will notice is all three designs have a red box around them. Can you see that? So you'll see we have the illuminated box up here, which means that we have our designs combined. So what that means is we can actually move these as a set. Now one thing you have to be aware of at this point is if I touch anywhere else on the screen right now, it will uncombine my design. So watch what happens. You see we have the three boxes and I'm just sitting here playing with the screen, and if I touch it, you see how the box is no longer illuminated and only one design has the red boxes around it. So let me go back and recombine. So in order to do that, I need to go down here and retouch the combine. And I'll combine all three and I'll say OK. Now the other option you have is I can actually at this point go ahead and touch this box one more time. And do you see now we have this one big box that's combined all three designs on the screen. And now if I touch anywhere on the screen, it will not uncombine them. It's a good idea to press the combine key to do your final combination. So let me zoom back out. So let's talk about the stipple button. So let me go ahead and just touch stipple. And at this point, you can see right here, it's 14 by 9.5 inch hoop. Well, as you'll recall, I had mentioned that I am working with a 9.5 by 9.5, but you'll also recall that I'm actually working on a bag. So let me show you that. So there is our 9.5 by 9.5. But remember, I'm working on a bag, and so I think I would actually do it in 8 by 8. Now, if I left it like it is right now, it would stipple right up to my design. The nice thing is we have this distance button that allows us to increase the distance that the stippling will stop and turn around and go a different direction from our design. So I'm going to say 0.16. Now down here, the spacing means how far apart do we want our actual stipple lines to be. So the first thing we can do is go in here and say preview. And that is what, with the current spacing and being 0.16 away from our design, is what our stippling would look like. Now, if we would like to have stippling that's not quite so tight, we can come in here and increase the spacing between the lines of the stippling. Now, it's not going to change while we're doing this on the screen, but I'm going to go up to 230. There we go. I'll zoom out so you can see I was doing the plus key here. Now, nothing was changing on the screen as I was doing that, but watch what happens now that I've increased the spacing to 0.232. And here's our stippling. When I hit preview, and you see how it's given us a little bit wider stippling. I think I'm not quite happy with like right here, so I think I'm going to back that down just a bit to 220, and I'm going to hit preview one more time. Maybe just a little bit more. See right here? And there you go. So I'm a little bit, well, actually I'm not as happy with that. There you go. So if you're happy with how that all looks, you can answer OK and move forward and go ahead and stitch this out. So you can say OK. And there is our design with the stippling in a 9 by 9 or 9.5 by 9.5 inch hoop with an 8 by 8 design. So I can actually at this point go ahead and say embroider and send it to the machine. But I want to show you what happens if I end up having this design and I stitch it out and I'm like, I get my whole design stitched out and I realized I didn't set up the stippling. So let's talk about that. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch this out and then show you what happens if you've stitched something and after you've stitched it, you've decided to go back in and add stippling. So I'll be back with you after I stitch it out. So here are our finished geckos with the little leaf between them. And if I was actually working on a bag and I looked at it at this point, I might actually want to go ahead and place a stippling or a fill stitch around them. So let's see what we would do if at this point we decided that we wanted to do a fill stitch and the design was no longer on our screen. So here we are back at the screen, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go back into embroidery. And the next thing I'd like to do, now there are a couple of ways that we can actually get the design back, but I want to show you if it's a design like what we've just done, how we can actually make a stamp in our embroidery screen so that we can then go into the design center. First thing I would do is go back and find my little lizard. And there's our first lizard, and we're going to go ahead and set it. And there he is on our screen. So before we go any further, I'm going to move him out of the way. And what I'd like to do now is actually, before I add anything else, is I'm going to go ahead and this button up here is our scan button in our embroidery area. So I'm going to say OK. I'm going to let it scan. And there's our scan design. So this just scanned our fabric with our design that's already stitched out. So the next thing we want to do is take our first lizard. We're going to go into edit. And I can go ahead and place him, but I think I'm going to duplicate him to start out with. And there's our second lizard. So let me go into this first one, and I want to rotate him 90 degrees. And then what I'm going to do is drag him right on top of the lizard that's already stitched. And then we're going to come down here to this lizard. And before I can go any further, I need to mirror his image, just like we did when we originally set up the design. Remember, that's the mirror image is the two triangles that are back to back. This one, I'm going to go ahead and rotate him. This time I'll rotate him 90 degrees backwards or to the left. And I'll use my movement keys here. Just move him right on top of the other. And then we need to add, we'll say OK. We'll add the leaf. And there's our leaf. And let's go ahead and edit him. And there you go. So I'll say OK. And now we're back to our original placement. You can see that everything is covering our already stitched design. So the next thing we want to do, notice how we still have the red box only around the leaf. And you'll remember from when we were doing the design originally, we need to come down here to our square, triangle, circle, and we need to combine our design. And there are our three designs combined into one. And we're going to go ahead and this time we are going to use this button right here. Instead of having the three red boxes, I want to have one box. And the next thing we're going to do, and this is the new feature this time, is we want to make a stamp. And what this green button with the flower does, it makes a stamp and saves it so we can pull it back up in my design center. So there is our stamp, and it's asking how far away do we want the stamp to be from our actual design. So we're going to increase that just a bit. That looks pretty good. So once we're happy with it, then this little colorful flower with the red arrow is now going to save it to our stamp in my design center. Say OK. And now we're ready to actually go into the design center. So we're done with the screen. Let me just show you one thing before we go into the design center. We could truly actually go ahead and add stippling now. Let me show you what happens. We can use our stipple button. And there's our 8x8. We could do with our distance and our spacing, we could still have it do the distance right here. And we could change our spacing and preview it. And then once we're happy with it, we could just say OK. And then if we did this now and did embroidery, we would just see how it wants to re-stitch everything. This is our new stippling here. All we'd have to do is come down to our plus minus and cycle through until we get to the stippling. So that's a really simple way to do our stippling at this point. But let me show you the other way. So let's hit return, and let's go up here to, it's going to ask us if it's okay to delete. And now let's go into my design center. In design center, we have our shapes key here. And what the shapes key does, it has the little flower up here that we saw in our embroidery screen. And we want to go ahead and pull in our lizards. And there is the outline of our lizards. Now obviously we don't want the outline of the lizard and the leaf to stitch, so we'll go into our line property. And then we're going to touch, see how the colors are all lit now? We're going to actually select no stitching. And the colors kind of gray out. And we'll say OK. And now listen as I touch the lizards. See? Because we chose that, anything that was on our screen will now not be stitched out. The next thing we're going to do is go into our Shapes button and choose a square. We'll say OK. And see how there's a red box now around this black square? We're going to change the size of that using the Size button. And we're just going to increase it because I want it to be about just over 7. I want it to be 8.5 here and 7 down here. Okay, and now, so it's 708, and now I'm going to make it taller. Okay, and there it is. That's the actual size of the bag that I'm working on. And that was one of the reasons I was having us do this in the design center, is I could actually get these measurements exactly to the size that I need them. So once I'm happy with that, I'll answer OK. And we can also go back into the notepad and make sure that the no stitch is still on. And that makes it so once we touch the bucket, we can verify that the box is not going to stitch. So the next thing we want to do is go into our regions property and go into the region property notepad, and we're going to choose our stipple, and I'll leave it as a red stipple. And instead of the paintbrush, because if we did the paintbrush we get this, so we'll say undo. Instead we're going to choose the bucket in the regions area, and then we will just touch the screen. And there is our stipple exactly around our stamp of our 2 geckos and our leaf, and it's inside the box that exactly to the size that we need it. So once we're happy, we can say next. And down here, let me adjust the camera a little bit. Down here we have 3 options. It's asking us, do we want to change, let me touch it. This is the run pitch. Do we want to change anything with the run pitch? I'm actually happy with that, so I'll leave it. Then this is the spacing, and it's asking, do we want to space out the space is the area between all of the lines. I'm going to increase that just a bit. Okay, and we will set it. And then the last selection is the distance. And for that, I'm actually going to increase that to 0.12. And I'll say set. And we can always go back in and change these after we preview. We'll say preview and OK. And there is our stippling. And so you can see it's got these empty areas where our design is. And we'll say set and OK. And there it is. We're now in the embroidery screen, and it is ready to actually do the stippling around our design. One thing I'd like to point out before we start stitching, because this is what throws a lot of people off, just because our geckos and our leaf are here on the screen does not mean that they're going to stitch out. Remember, those were a scanned image that we ended up making the stamp from, and so therefore they are still sitting there as a background image. A lot of people ask, well, how do I know that? 2 ways. One, you can see right here, we only have a red thread that's going to stitch, and so the red we know is the stippling. The other is, if you touch embroidery, and you'll see down here, you know how normally we can choose the plus minus, and it'll show us exactly what's going to stitch out. And the only thing that we can choose is the red stippling. If this throws you off and you don't want to have it on your screen, you can go up here to your notepad and you can go over to page 9 and you can either delete or turn off the background image. Let me show you what happens when we turn the background image off. I'll say off, okay, and now you can see that our geckos are gone. And this is exactly what you see here is exactly what's going to stitch out. Let me go back and actually go over to page 9 and go ahead and delete the background image. If we actually pull in another design, there's a good chance that our background image is actually going to come up on our screen. So if you'd like to, you can either delete it before you start stitching, or you can come back in and delete it afterwards. I'm going to go ahead and delete it now. Say OK. And that is what is going to stitch out. So let's move on to the next step. We're going to touch embroidery and lower the presser foot and press start. Our design is all set. Our stippling is done around our design, and we're ready to continue making our bag. Thanks for watching.